All right, we are back for another one of our conversations in this ongoing series called the 12 Days of KRUXmas. And I am delighted to be able to have the opportunity to chat with someone who will be unfamiliar to most of you. I can't say all of you because yeah, for some of you who know Barnt, who did a conversation with us a little while ago, um, he knows who I'm talking to now, and that is Esther. I don't want to steal too much, um, yeah, too much of the time. I'll let her introduce herself, but yeah, just glad for us to have the opportunity to chat, and yeah, as part of this series in December. So, Esther, I'll
You
let you introduce yourself and just share a little bit about, yeah, your family, your sort of faith journey a little bit.
Sure. Thanks, Tyler, for letting me be part of this. It's a really cool idea to sort of bring this kind of conversation into the church. I think that's really, really important. So my name is Esther. I grew up in Peru in South America, which is how I know Barent. His parents and my parents were co-workers in the same very, very small Andean village. So I knew Barent from the time he was born, which is really fun. And I'm good friends with his sisters as well. So my parents worked as Bible translators in a dialect of Quechua. So I was always surrounded by um, God's word, but also the idea of communicating it and communicating important ideas across languages, which is probably why I studied that, why I pursued that in college. So I grew up in a Christian home and grew up like in a missionary setting, and then chose to go to a Christian college and studied abroad in France as part of that time. And while I was there in France particularly, but other study abroads that I did as well, I was really opened and stretched and called into a space that just like had me see God in a different way. In some ways, it was very, very challenging, and in other ways, it was really important for me to understand that my perception of God was pretty small because I'm a finite human being with a finite set of experiences. Um, but in France and other areas that I traveled, I interacted with both believers and unbelievers that enhanced and grew my faith in God tremendously. And those experiences, I think, brought into play a lot of my um, eventual desire to study what I did in my PhD, which was the Sublime, which is sort of the study of kind of an encounter with the divine or something that is incredibly enormous and something much larger than yourself. So I think a lot of my interaction with culture and language outside of myself began the hunger for those studies.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm wondering from your work if you could give an example of the Sublime within, right? So you did your studies in French literature, but
Mm-hmm.
forgive me because I don't remember the exact details. It was a very particular period of time.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, can you just maybe just share briefly about that, and maybe can you give an example of what we might understand to be the sublime in the literature?
Sure. Um, so I studied 17th century French literature, which kind of in France is considered sort of like the greatest century. So like we think of Shakespeare in British literature as kind of like the king of playwrights. And so a little bit later in France, there were three major playwrights that were kind of considered the apex of French theater. So I studied one of them. And in this period of time, there was also this conversation happening um, around a sensation that happens when you encounter something incredible, whether it's beautiful or terrible or powerful. And in this particular moment, it was starting to happen in encounters in literature. So, like whether that was on stage or when you're reading a play or when you're reading a work of literature. And then later in the later 17th and early 18th century, it began more moving out of literature and into like the natural world and poetry and art and other things like that. But in this particular moment, it was really seen as like an encounter with a human creation that was drawn from some encounter in the natural world. So usually you described, like a powerful experience that you'd had, like seeing the explosions of a volcano, for instance, or a storm coming over the horizon. Or it could also be like a really powerful emotion. So like one of the moments in the Sublime in the 17th century is there's this very, very powerful character, and she has been abandoned by all of the people around her. And her companion asks her, all of your allies are gone. Who's left? And she said, myself. I am the only one left, and I will do this thing that I want to do. And then that one sort of little word, myself, the theorists of the Sublime saw kind of that sort of condensed intensity of emotion, of like the power of someone who can like be solely unto themselves able to do something, which can be an example of the Sublime. So I studied this playwright, and I looked in his works for ways that he was trying to create that powerful emotion through his plays in his audience. So if he created settings or had certain words or whatever, like he wanted to create an emotional response in his audience that sort of overwhelmed them with power.
No, no, that's no, I like that. Yeah, just the examples that you gave with making that connection to the natural world, but then also, uh, so the spoken word that that particular woman used, and
Mm-hmm.
yeah, that becoming sort of this. I mean, even you just telling me about it doesn't quite capture it, but you get a sense.
Right.
Yeah, I'm sort
You
of
can
like, "Ooh,
communicate
that was
something.
really, yeah, really powerful."
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
Now, maybe fast forwarding a little bit to the present, um,
Mm-hmm.
how do you feel like literature can continue to help us engage spiritually, right? What can literature help us learn or tell us about God, or maybe about ourselves or about the world?
Mm-hmm. So fundamentally, I believe that humans are creative. It's, I think, one of the most important ways that we carry the image of God in us. Um, and so our ability to create, whether it's our own stories or the stories of other people, or hold those stories um, for other people, is one of the ways in which we act out God's um, gift to us in creativity. And there's obviously like many, many, many other ways to do that. But maybe because I am a writer and that's part of my craft, I think telling stories and speaking stories to each other and writing
Mm,
stories is one of the ways in which we express that image of God. And I think that it's also very powerful because in that creation we see um, the way God has given us the ability to speak truth and also lie. And the way we use words, whether it's to repeat truth or whether it's to repeat lie, then creates, in a sense, our own reality. So, like if someone, for instance, um, is um, is an abusive person and they repeat over and over again, or in a story they repeat over and over again, um, a very, very intense lie, but it's repeated over and over again. The people around them begin to believe it. This is one reason why I think that words in advertising are actually very interesting and also very dangerous, because they're
mm,
repeated everywhere, right? We see words, we hear words everywhere, and they're repeated often enough that we begin to believe them, because the repetition of words and the like power of words begins to hold its own reality. It might not be the true reality,
mhm,
but it is a reality. And I think that for me, literature, good writing, powerful story is a way of speaking truth. And it doesn't necessarily have to be like overtly Christian. Like many, many, many of the like best books are not written either by Christians or with any Christian narrative, but they hold very powerful human truths that I think um, shape us and allow us to have a perception of who we are, who other people are, and who creation is in light of God's relationship with us. Excuse me. That give us incredible just it's an incredible space in which to understand the world around us. And I think um, Tyler, you're a fan of Plantinga, and I'm pretty sure it was Plantinga that said all truth is God's truth, right? Or at least he reiterated that
Mm.
on some level. Um, and I think that that is very very important, especially if we encounter truth in a book that is not written by a Christian, or truth that seems to also hold like complexity if it's like from another religion or whatever. But if we hold that all truth is God's truth, then we can sort of carry that with us, and shape ourselves without losing ourselves, I think, in the stories that we read.
Yeah. No, that's good.
Excuse me.
I think it echoes something that we've talked about in a number of um, seminars and talks that KRUX has done over the past few years, just thinking about common grace and the ways that we see uh, God give people gifts and abilities to communicate, yeah, truth and reality, and um, yeah, and that we can gain from that. And it can be useful and helpful for helping us be able to see things better and understand things better. And all the more because we hold it within the framework in which we recognize its proper place, right? Um, I think also, you were mentioning about story, and it reminded me of the fact that um, yeah, that we see all of those things you mentioned about the power of words, story, and all of this echoed for us in scripture as well, right?
Yeah.
And how
Yeah.
God uses words in very particular ways, and how, whether it's with law or whether it's with the promises, the covenants,
Mm-hmm.
Jesus and the way he interacts with people, sort of some of those repeated lines you find in different places, the way that they're
Mm-hmm.
intended to sort of cultivate a certain posture or mindset, or just really
Mm-hmm.
reiterate something so that it becomes second nature for people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
My dad was just here for Thanksgiving, and he mentioned something like that that really struck me. He was checking through Leviticus with a group that he translates with, and he talks about the repetition of the phrase "I am the Lord and you are mine" throughout Leviticus, and how important it is for us as humans, but also specifically the Israelites in that time, as they were taking over the land, to realize that they did not own the land, that the land belonged to God, they belonged to God, and that all things fell under His ownership and hand. And that in reminding themselves over and over and over again in that repetition, they should not take an advantage that was not given to them,
Mm.
um, outside of the right that had been given to them. So yeah.
Yeah. Um, we aren't going to go into it, but my mind is buzzing with lots of ways that I begin to see this connecting to um, the vital role and also the sort of sense of responsibility that the church has in terms of
Yeah.
how the church uses words
Yeah.
and wields the word as we think about scripture, and how we're obviously it's the Holy Spirit, but how we're involved in shaping identities, um,
Mm-hmm.
and what identity are we communicating and seeking to sort of um, to pass on, or yeah, to others. Um,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, so there's all sorts of things that, yeah, that sort of gets going in my mind. But I want to turn to the last question that I had, and that was just to give you an opportunity to share a little bit more. You mentioned being a writer,
Mm-hmm.
a little bit more about what you're up to now, what sort of projects you have going on, and And really, what it is you hope to do through them, right? So what is it that
Mhm.
you're wanting to communicate or hopefully, yeah, pass to others?
Yeah. So after I did my PhD, I was hoping to be a professor, but because of constraints, that did not happen. And so I pivoted to writing. So I am learning the craft of creative writing, which is very different than dissertation writing. And in some ways far scarier because there are no
Mm,
rules. Well, there are rules, but they're much more wibbly wobbly. Um, and one of the things that I've sort of been engaging with is um, how language empowers the stories that we give, like I said before, um, and then how that comes out of both our own personal experience and the experience of those around us. So I'm doing a couple of different things in my writing. I'm doing mostly poetry because it's short form and it's somewhat easier to do with a toddler, which is what I have. My life is consumed by. I have a 2-year-old.
uh,
Um, so I have very small windows of time in which I can work. So poetry is a little bit easier because I can think about it in ways that, while I'm washing dishes, etc. Um, but also a lot of my poetry has come out of experiences that my daughter has taught me,
mm,
whether that's her interaction with music before she was born. She would jump in my womb to loud chords of music. And that was a very intense sort of experience for me to realize that I was carrying a human being that had their own
mm,
taste, I guess, for lack of a better word, before I had even met her. Um, and her own sort of like feelings and emotions and interactions with the world before she was even in the world, outside in the world. So that was like a very, speaking of identity, that was a very sort of like identity shaking moment for
mm,
me. And then, um, yeah, just like other things that I've experienced through her eyes of just like the wonder that she encounters in leaves that I find very ugly. Like you have autumn leaves, but then you have autumn leaves, right? Like we think the like brilliant colored ones are the most beautiful. But when she was about 1, I took her for a walk, kind of her first walk in the woods by herself, where she was actually in charge of her own pace. And she would pick up the most decrepit leaves and she would just stare at them as if they were the most incredible treasure. And I was like, wow, I need to rethink my perception of beauty. I think we're very formed to understand beauty in certain ways. I think there is
mm,
a certain truth to like aesthetic beauty, but I think we also forget to look wider at different things in a wider lens. And so that was really, I think, like an important sort of moment for me. So both of those produced poems that I think shaped my world a little bit. And then the other thing that I'm working on is just a bigger project is like a young adult fantasy novel, but I'm specifically trying to write a community of characters around disability,
mm,
where the main character is loses his leg fairly early on in the story, and then has to grapple with both other people's perception of him, his own perception of himself, and how should that loss um, sort of lead him to understand his role in the larger community. Um, so it's been a really interesting story to write, and it's gotten much bigger than I thought and much more political than I thought when I first started to write it. So that's been kind of a fun experience, is to like kind of let the world grow as it wants to grow,
mm,
um, and try and keep a hand on something, but also give it freedom, which has also been sort of a moment for me to understand the heart of God in His creativity. That like if you try and control your characters and say you're going to do this, the story is a bad story. Like you
mm,
will not write a good story. And so in order to sort of let a world grow the way it needs to grow, you have to give the characters their own freedom, their freedom to make choices, and then you have to deal with the choices um, that they make and try and figure out how to write it. And obviously, I'm not omniscient, so it takes me a lot longer than God does. But it has given me a glimpse into the heart of God and the patience of God
mm,
with us as He writes our stories.
mm. And um, Well, one real quick thing is to ask, what kind of music does your daughter prefer?
Well, the thing that made her jump in utero was the chords of an organ when we went to York Minster and listened to evensong. So it was like this deep as the like organ like started. So that made her leap. But she would respond to us singing hymns to her
Hmm.
as well. She would just get all like wiggly. Now she's very into like all of the toddler songs. But we'll start to listen like if John is playing his music, which usually involves you know, some sort of experimental and indie group. Um, she'll listen to it, and sometimes she says she doesn't like it, and sometimes she listens to it and says she does like it. So she will definitely, I think, like understand music in a way that I don't understand it. John
Hmm.
shares that sort of connection with her.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Oh. And where can people, if they want to follow some of your poetry or just, yeah, if they want to go further, where can they find you?
So I have a Substack, which is a subscription-based writing platform. So it's either free or not free. You can choose to pay or not pay. There's currently all of the things that I post are free, and then if you want to comment, then there's a paywall. Um, but I can share that link with you if you want to put it in, I don't know, the description of this.
Yeah.
Um, and the Substack is called Pebbles and Moths, but I think the actual domain name is something different. So I'll share that with you. So that's kind of like my writing base that I do, and then I have a couple of other. So I've had a poem published in Ecstasis, which now has become a different name, magazine, which is a Christian magazine, and then another poem published in Vita Poetica, which is another Christian magazine, and that's it. I'm sending things out into the void, but they often come back. So,
Hmm. Yeah.
but I try and publish something on my Substack like once ish a month, depending on my energy levels.
Yeah. And I always try to end with, is there anything else you'd like to say or yeah, anything you haven't shared that you'd like to?
Um, I would say that one of the things that I think is really important, whether people read fiction or nonfiction or whatever, is the telling of your own story. So learning who you are and how to share that in light of who God is one of the most important things that we can do as humans, both to tell our own and hold other people's own
Mhm.
stories. And I think that as a church, um, we vary throughout history in how well we do that. But I think there's this really incredible moment now in history to be able to do that well in light of a lot of things that are going on. Um, so I think learning how to listen to the stories of other people and hear them as God's working out in their lives, but then also to share your own is, I think, something that's really important.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate you taking the time. And yeah, especially the time when little ones are sleeping and it's the sort of the small space that you have for getting other types of things done. And so, yeah, thanks a lot, Esther, for this little bit of conversation that I think will be really fruitful for further discussion and sort of reflection for those who watch.
Thank you for sharing. Thank you
Yeah,
for letting me come.
absolutely.